The man is a wanker, it don't get much better. The man is a wanker. The man is a wanker, he don't get much better. Physically past the tax. Do you want a facial cavity? Courtesy of my Jampandy, you fucking cunt. I'll have a 32-inch waist in raw denim and stick him in the freezer, done. I've got years on you, while you've got belly on me. In a belly competition, mate, you'd win easily.
£8.7 billion, ladies and gentlemen, is what the government has apparently wasted on PPE. But don't take my word for it. Have a look at the newspapers. Even the Daily Mail manages to take a day off from cheerleading for Boris Johnson and putting this story about our money, your money, taxpayers' money, they usually call it, don't they? I wonder whether all those weird think tanks will be up in arms today. You know, the ones that get really, really cross when the government spends money on things like poor children. How dare they? What do they call themselves? The Taxpayers Consortium, names like that. Secretly funded, deeply sinister individuals who refuse to tell you who pays their wages, but they pop up on the telly and the radio all the time, railing against taxpayers' money being wasted on things like foreign aid for the most desperate people on the planet, or school dinners for the hungriest children in this country. Where are they going to be today? Oddly enough, those kind of Herberts often get hired by politicians like Boris Johnson. In fact, I think there isn't there, someone in Downing Street who used to work for one of those dodgy outfits claiming to represent the interests of taxpayers. Last time I went in to describe it as the Institute of Economic Affairs. They spent 2 years complaining and trying to get some sort of redress. It was very amusing. You must look the story up. What they were most cross about was being called Herberts, the silly Herberts. But the point, of course, is this. They won't say a word about real waste of money by right-wing politicians. They will probably be silent. I bought a premium Zoom account, James, because we couldn't meet up face-to-face. What a waste of money that was. I should have just been throwing parties like the Prime Minister. It's a very good point that you make, actually. A very good point that you make. Hi, James. It's Kevin from Dudley here. My biggest waste of money during lockdown was buying your book. That's bad, mate. That is... Keith, you're fired. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. Of course, they saved a few million quid by removing that universal credit uplift, Pinky reminds us, and not feeding children. And Fiona suggests we could go with 2 lots of PPE, the paddling pool expense and the... was it personal protective equipment? I do not know. Keep those coming, actually. We'll have a little look at some of them in the course of the programme. Do you know what the problem with my inbox is now? I don't know whether other presenters have got better ways of dealing with it. They've probably got staff. Eddie Mair's got staff of thousands on his programme. There's 48 people work on the Eddie Mair programme, the last time I counted. He's even got someone. Eddie Mair has someone whose job is to warm up his slippers before he gets into the studio in the morning. Honestly, I'm a second-class citizen on this radio station. 48 staff he's got. Sheila Fogarty has an official fanner. For when she gets a bit hot in the studio, someone comes in and fans her. Someone wafts cool air towards her. I can't even begin to tell you what Steve Allen's got on his support team. I've got Keith. So my inbox fills up so quickly now that I can't even... I struggle to read one out before it's disappeared under all the others. James and Camden, you forgot to mention your linen suit from TK Maxx. That wasn't during lockdown, James in Camden, and you're paying far too much attention to this programme. You should be like Kevin in Dudley. Give yourself a day off, read the book instead. 9 minutes after 10 is the time. Where were we? PPE. 8.7 billion quid. Oh, come on. Seriously? This isn't funny, is it? You add it up with the 4.3 billion that was lost to COVID loan fraud, and you're looking at a figure around the 13 billion pound mark. But let's focus first on the bulk of that money, which was blown on PPE failings. And what I'll do is read you the front page of the Daily Mail, which is sadly returning to the days of being an absolute sewer of a newspaper, but because it is obviously the polar opposite, generally speaking, of my own position on things like common decency and politics, I'll read you what they say about this so that you can't accuse me of bias or any sort of tub thumping or or rhetorical flourish. Almost £9 billion has been wasted on personal protective equipment, it emerged last night. In a staggering illustration of government waste, much of the COVID kit was faulty or not used before its sell-by date. Ministers also paid hugely over the odds and were left with equipment that later crashed in value. In all, £8.7 billion has had to be written off by the Department of Health and Social Care. You would have been among the first people in the country to hear about this yesterday, not because I'm a good journalist or anything like that, but because I was following Robert Peston on Twitter, and he was the first journalist to wade through the report and find this absolute hand grenade, some 200 pages into it. There's a second story as well, which I think is still unfolding. Whether or not this money includes the money that's now being sent, you keep sending me pictures of container parks, and I don't notice what they're about at the first time. I think you're sending me pictures of queues, Brexit queues in Kent. There's another car park being built, by the way, lorry park. We'll have a look at that situation in Folkestone a little later. It's another thing they told you would, Project Fear. Now, of course, Project Here. The pictures you send me of containers that I think at first glance are more evidence of Brexit queues, but actually these are containers where some of this PPE is still being stored. It's worthless. What do they do? Do they just torch it? Do they just set fire to it? I genuinely don't know. But they're paying £1 million a week, according to some reports. Which you could tell, by the way, I'm sounding a tiny bit distracted. I'm looking now for some of those reports that you have sent to me. I'll find them during the break. That would be the professional way to do it, wouldn't it? Don't look for stuff that you're going to use on the programme while actually presenting the programme, because the people listening will be able to tell. You can instead look during the pauses, the punctuation marks. Keith told me to stop calling them breaks, so I need to think of new things to call them now. Punctuation marks. Do you like punctuation marks? Pauses. You're in the doghouse anyway after playing that round of applause for Keith and Dudley. Probably illiterate. The question I've got for you is, how did this happen? And the number you need to call to answer the question is 0345 606 0973. And listen, it doesn't have to be critical. It may well be that you can understand how some of this money got spaffed up the wall, which of course is the phrase Boris Johnson uses to describe investigations into child sexual abuse. A little odd, considering the lies he was telling about Keir Starmer in the House of Commons this week. We'll find out. I wonder what lies he'll tell in the House of Commons today. PMQ's with us at 12, which means we get the thrill of watching Theo Usherwood slide into the studio shortly before 12 o'clock. That's on the horizon today. But let's have a look at this, because I don't get it. I don't get it. And I don't even know anymore whether or not we had or have what you might describe as parameters of normality. Is this just evidence of a government operation that is approaching public spending with exactly the same caution, care, clarity and leadership that it approached the coronavirus lockdown? I mean, does it spread? Like, is there a sort of osmosis of absurdity underway? If the man in charge is so categorically careless, callous and useless, does it infiltrate through to all corners of government, all corners of Whitehall? I'd like to think not. You'd hope that there could be a sort of quarantine, wouldn't you, put up around the Prime Minister? I wonder if Dominic Cummings saw himself as a sort of human quarantine. I think he probably did. I think he probably saw his job as to keep Johnson isolated. It meant, of course, that the man who was responsible for the Brexit vote ended up being the most powerful unelected bureaucrat in this country's history, which is a little ironic if you follow such matters. But I bet he saw himself as a sort of human hazmat suit, a human chemical suit, one of those things you see on the telly when they're going into somewhere where you saw it on Chernobyl, where there's been a lot of radiation. Dominic Cummings thought his job was to sort of isolate and quarantine Boris Johnson, while he, Dominic Cummings, got on with the business of running the country. Because if you don't quarantine Boris Johnson, then does the infection spread? Does it spread like a sort of foul miasma of uselessness and possible corruption. And by corruption, I don't necessarily mean criminality. I mean corruption in the biological sense of the word. I mean making something healthy rotten, corrupting something. There is something rotten in the state of Denmark. There is something rotten in the heart of Downing Street. And does it spread everywhere? Is that part of the answer to how they could spend £8.7 billion on dodgy personal protective equipment? Or have you got a better answer? How does it happen? The closer you are to this world, the more interesting perhaps your insights will be. The number you need is 03456060973. And I know some of the defences being put up involve, oh no, they had to do this. Michael Gove, always very plausible, Michael Gove, except that time where he toyed with the idea of pretending that he regularly goes for a little drive to test his eyesight before going on long journeys. But usually very plausible, Michael Plausible Gove, they call him. He's claiming, oh no, we had to do this. Absolutely had to pay over the odds, had to move quickly. £8.7 billion wasted. That's a victory. That's a win. Go us. Don't parrot that unless you've got some evidence that it's true. Don't be that person that ends up parroting what Michael Gove says. Be the person who tries to find out whether or not it's true. Be that person instead. Don't be a parrot. Be a person who wants to know the truth. And we'll start together here. 03456060973 is the number to call for you to tell me how you think. And I don't expect any caller to account for that entire £8.7 billion. Although if you can, you go straight to the top of the class. But knowing what you know, working where you work, doing what you do, just tell me where some of this money has gone, how some of this money was wasted, how some of this money was squandered during or immediately prior to what may well prove to be the toughest economic season that this country has faced in generations. I don't imagine anyone can account for the entire £8.7 billion. How many zeros is that? It's 9 zeros, isn't it? 8.7 thousand million, I think. And you forget what a huge sum of money that is. I think it's hard to get your head around it, but it is. I mean, it's just it's more money than they will raise in an entire. Oh no, if you add it to the money that was wasted on fraud, it's more than a year's worth of the looming national insurance tax rise. How did it happen? And you can be kind. You can offer up explanations that perhaps will soften the blow. I don't think you're going to be able to account for £8.7 billion worth of wastage in a way that sounds warm for the government, but you might be able to encourage us to think, well, it probably wasn't that much, or it wasn't all wasted, even though that's the word the Daily Mail use on its front page. It's not accurate. 21 minutes after 10. Lewis is in Ealing. Lewis, what have you got?
Hi, James. I'm going to try and defend the government.
Fantastic. Lewis, for people not familiar with this programme, Lewis is one of our best callers, and usually he makes brilliant contributions, which I then spend the next 18 months passing off as my own. So go on, Lewis, fill your boots.
Certainly put me on the pedestal now. Right. So I work in pharmaceutical transportation, and during the very early stages of the lockdown, there are very few companies, freight forwarders, that actually have their own planes and things. So like your DHLs and your FedEx.
Yes.
But apart from that, most freight forwarders book space on commercial airliners. And so when the lockdowns really kicked in, especially in Europe and the US, there were no commercial flights. And all the space on the very few planes that were available, the prices skyrocketed.
Oh, okay.
In pharmaceutical transportation, with like chemotherapy drugs and vaccines, you have to get it through. So it doesn't matter what the transportation cost was. It's life-saving medicines. You've got to put it through. Mm. So for a large part with the PPE, the transportation costs were so huge because of the lockdowns and all this, and because of the local ability to manufacture it, just wouldn't be able to keep up with the supply. So supply, demand, the value was always they had to pay such a premium to get it in, no matter what. There was always, because I remember reading somewhere yesterday, I can't remember exactly, about 4 billion, I think, was like a readjustment of the value of the product. Of
but that includes stuff that will now never be used. So although you're right to explain how the massive spike in cost can be explained in a way that doesn't paint the purchasers in a bad light, purchasing way more than they needed and also overpaying for stuff that could never be used is indefensible.
Well, as I said to your researcher, I was like, I'm only going to defend them so far.
Yes.
Obviously, like with the contracts, it could have been done way more efficiently. There wasn't enough preparation, but that's the point. If you're going to panic and do it last minute, you're going to have the situation where they were always going to have to they've exacerbated the problem. It was always going to happen. It didn't need to be this bad.
What do you know about Operation Cygnus?
Write-off of this.
Of course. So at the end of this nightmare, there was always going to be a sum of money that had to be written off. I think that's absolutely reasonable, and you're right to remind us.
Significantly less.
So say $1 billion, maybe.
Well, I wouldn't know exactly, but yeah, let's just say half.
$500 million. $2 billion. Let's split the difference. I mean, this is completely pie in the sky speculation.
Yeah,
we'll probably be hired by Rishi Sunak by tea time with this kind of insight.
PPE, so I can't tell you exactly.
No, there'll be people listening who do. Do you know much about Operation Cygnus?
I don't.
No, because a few people are telling me that if we had not ignored the findings of Operation Cygnus or earlier alarms over long-term pandemic planning, then we would have been ahead of the game on this global scramble for PPE and could have avoided many of these mistakes. We're looking at wastage of approximately 2/3. So however much of that would have happened regardless, no one is going to argue that 2/3 or 60-odd% wastage is forgivable, excusable, or even, for many of us, comprehensible.
No, I think you'd have to look at how much PPE, statistically, how much PPE is written off on a normal year.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Because I used to work on a site, a drug manufacturing site, so we'd use PPE like plastic.
Well, like in Breaking Bad?
All the time. Yeah, pretty much.
Cool.
Well, like, when you see the labs and people in the suits and things, so we had all this PPE, and I used to go in and test those labs to make sure they're all clean so that all the drugs are sterile.
Although at the end most of it would be, even if it was left over at the end. So you're looking at the sell-by dates, aren't you? The best before.
Yeah,
so you're always going to have stuff in the cupboard that has expired. And it's better to have stuff, let's be honest about this, and Lewis has brought this thought to the forefront of my mind. It's better to have a bit of stuff left over in the cupboard, even in the country's cupboard, than it is to run out. I'd rather have a few quid lost to ensure that we never ran out than run out. But of course, this government managed to do both. It managed to massively overpay for stuff that turned out to be useless, and it also managed to run shortages. And we haven't even mentioned the £37 billion spent on test and trace. Do you remember when that was all we talked about? Do you remember when Dido Harding's name tripped off our tongue so winningly? 37 billion quid. And no wonder they told us to stop making comparisons with other countries. 26 after 10 is the time. A couple of phone lines free now as Lewis waves goodbye. 0345 60 60 973. You can grab his phone line. Michael's in Darwin in Lancashire. Michael, what do you want to say?
I work for a supermarket.
Oh, yes.
I wouldn't be willing to say which branch.
That's what I wasn't going to ask.
Last month, we received a shipment of hand gel, the antiviral hand gel.
Yes.
About two pallets worth of it, should I say.
Yes.
6 foot high, mountains of it, and every single bottle was December 2021.
Oh.
So
they're trying to flog it to you.
It's of no value to us whatsoever.
But you can send it back to the supplier, can't you? I mean, that's some sort of breach of contract, surely.
Well, I would hope so, but I would hope the government can then... It was the government that sent it to us. It's through their scheme.
When did it arrive?
It arrived this month, January, just gone.
They're still sending out out-of-date hand gel. Is this for sale in a supermarket, or is this the stuff that you give away for free?
It's the stuff we give to staff.
Right, and that comes from the state, does it? They supply that. It doesn't come from head office. It doesn't come from the company.
We believe it comes from the government. It's got a gem labels all over it. So,
yeah, blimey.
Yeah,
and it's already out of date. I don't know what to say to that, really.
Say that again, sir.
I don't know what to say to that, really, which is not great for a radio presenter. I'm genuinely lost for words.
It's just baffling. And I don't really get how we can spend probably about a quarter of what we spent on the war in Afghanistan on stuff we just cannot use across Britain. absolutely.
Well, I think part of the answer is obviously the fact that they gave these massive contracts to people who weren't fit for purpose. And here's a really interesting one. And bearing in mind, I can never be 110% sure of the provenance of people who text into the programme or even call into the programme. But equally, sometimes you end up thinking, well, why would anybody not be telling the truth in this context? James, I oversaw the delivery of £50 million worth of COVID grants to businesses. This is going back to the fraud side of things. We undertook fraud checks and were confident we didn't make any fraudulent payments. The government gave us a massive kicking because they wanted the money out of the door immediately to get the headlines. So there's a really interesting theory, based apparently on experience. Why on earth would the government be so slack about this? Answer, because the short-term news cycle was their only priority. Now, whose mantra is that? Boris Johnson's. What do you care about? The short-term news cycle. Do you care about the country? No. Do you care about the truth? No. Do you care about the long-term health of the nation? No. Do you care about anybody or anything other than yourself? No. And what's best for you? Tomorrow's newspapers. So what are we going to do? Get as much money out there as you can. As much. Don't even ask where it's going. Give it to that woman we put in the Lords who makes bras. Give it to anyone. Give it to Matt Hancock's old pub landlord. Just make sure we can announce how much money we've been shoveling out the doors. Don't ask where it's going. Announce how much there is. I'm exaggerating slightly, but I think it fits the facts rather better than Michael Gove's explanations this morning. Don't you? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Do you remember the chap who rang in a few times? He spoke to a few of us on LBC who was pulling his hair out because he'd been doing this for years and he couldn't get arrested by government. And then we spoke to a woman who worked for an incubator company. Are they called incubators? Yeah, they are, aren't they? When you ventilators, forgive me. When they had ventilators, and she was trying to get in touch with them, she couldn't get in touch with the government. Ended up selling them overseas. So people who were actually already doing this, tending to get pushed to the back of a queue, while people on the so-called VIP lane, which meant they had contacts in government, were getting pushed to the front. And that's how you ended up with a hedge fund. 50 million FFP2 masks produced by a company called Ianda, which won deals worth 253 million quid, were not ultimately distributed as they had ear loops rather than head loops, meaning that they were unlikely to fit tightly enough. Company keeps the money because they said it delivered according to its contract, which means the contract wasn't read properly. And in an almost classic case of Johnsonian politics, you have one massive contract awarded to a company that supplied masks that weren't fit for purpose because they were going to be too loose around the head. And you have another one that, I think it was Pest Fix, that had £350 million worth of contracts. And they're currently locked in a legal battle with officials because some of the masks they supplied were too tight. That's just marvellous. That's keep covering all the angles. Why did you waste tens of million pounds on those masks over there too loose? Why did you waste tens of million pounds on those masks over there too tight? It's unbelievable, isn't it? £8.7 billion is the sum. How is the question? How do you reckon they managed to run up such a huge write-off on PPE supplies? Some of the answers will not be castigating. Some of the answers, I think, will be. And I think, one of the most worrying parts of this, and this really does speak to the whole cronyism air, cloud, suspicion, is the companies that got the contracts. And the suggestion coming from a lot of sources that the scrutiny, the due diligence, is that what it's called? The due diligence was almost non-existent. So people who are professionals in the relevant fields remain profoundly confused by the decision-making process that saw contracts go in the directions that they went. 10:36 is the time. Paul's in Streatham. Paul, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Yeah, hi. Just thank you for being a voice of reason in some fairly dark times recently.
Thank you.
So I would be slightly discreet because this is how I feed my children.
Okay.
But I'm a senior advisor to the Cabinet Office, and at the time of the award of some of the PPE, test and trace IT contracts, there was already a working in-house system that had gone through beta testing using the Isle of Wight as a trial.
I remember that.
Yeah, and it was decided right at the top that they wouldn't adopt that system, despite the fact that it was ready to go and ready to roll out, because it didn't provide sufficient financial support to the healthcare industry.
Well, I don't quite understand the second bit. Just explain. Pretend I'm stupid. Well, you don't have to pretend.
No. So effectively, there wasn't the way they sort of balanced financial support across various sectors during the pandemic wasn't sort of necessarily dictated by what was necessarily required. It would be a kind of almost a sort of a sprint to the finish line in terms of what companies and what technologies they felt required support,
right?
And then it was almost sort of reverse engineered to ensure that was therefore given.
Oh, okay. So if we don't, I mean, this was a bit like what the Greensill scandal looked like from the outside. In that if you don't, if we don't get these government contracts, we might go under, sort of thing.
Well, I
couldn't possibly
know Bill
comment.
Crothers actually.
Pardon?
I know Bill Crothers actually, so I couldn't possibly comment.
Oh, fair enough. So that would suggest that things were being done entirely for political reasons rather than public health reasons. Then,
quite correct.
Incredibly
yes.
frustrating for you.
It was only ever. I mean, this is why I've been sort of locking myself in a dark room on multiple occasions, because it's only ever been politically driven. There's absolutely no coincidence. The fact that the second lockdown was announced on the same day as the last day of the Brexit negotiations. I mean, it's only ever been politically driven.
About tomorrow's front pages.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we're picking up the bill, and we're sort of looking at a 2022 that is going to be very, very dark for an awful lot of people.
Just as the economic crisis escalates. So I mean, I sometimes, and you're kind enough to say nice things about the programme, so you'll know the context in which I often discuss these things. Talking, how much of it would you suggest is a sort of form of behavioural osmosis? Because we talk about Johnson caring only about tomorrow's front pages. Do you feel that does infest previously quite solid and sound structures? That if it's coming from the very heart of government, or am I being a little bit? Am I clutching my pearls unduly?
I mean, it would be nice if it was that, wouldn't it?
Well, it would be understandable. We could get our heads around it, and it would make it easier to believe that things can go back to normal once we've excised this particular tumour.
Yeah, and Johnson's one of the heads of the Hydra. It's sort of, as much as I loathe the gentleman, I'm not convinced that replacing him will actually change anything.
Because you're looking at a sort of systemic reverence for profit and private sector, and an almost sort of visceral hatred of public spending and public health.
Well,
ideological. We're back to those dodgy think tanks that have infiltrated the very heart of government. Although they'll be quiet about this, they exist supposedly to protect public money from being squandered.
Yeah, and there's almost a sort of an endemic attitude within the civil service, certainly, that sort of making money is a little bit grubby and sort of beneath us.
Okay.
But at the same time, we shouldn't, I believe anyway, that the taxpayer shouldn't be constantly fronting the bill for everything.
No, so there's a balance.
There should be an exit ramp to public funding.
Yes, no, I think you make a lot of sense. It's a grim analysis, Paul, and I'm very grateful to you for your clarity, actually, something that is largely absent from the people making these decisions and refusing often to explain them. But Michael Gove claiming we were hustling. Just let's pause for a minute to think about that. Michael Gove's defence of an £8.7 billion PPE write-off, and Paul, they're talking more about the test and trace thing, but I think the philosophy at the heart of government was neatly encapsulated. Michael Gove's defence of an £8.7 billion write-off is essentially that we had to behave like Arthur Daly in order to get our hands on this stuff. We had to be Del Boy Trotter. Is that true? Is anyone qualified to even tell us whether that's true? Is it fair of Michael Gove to claim that they had to go a little bit ish, a little bit R, in order to get their hands on this stuff? I would have thought if you were hustling, then you were more likely to end up buying stuff that was snide or dodgy, or what would Del Boy call it? Hooky Street. God bless Hooky Street. So you go out hustling and you get hustled. Also, if you were going for a hustle, if you were looking to, give someone your money and send them into the casino or send them into the market to double it, would you pick Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nadine Dorries? Would you? Would you pick them to do it? So what on earth does he mean when he says hustle? I've got a couple of phone lines free now for you to come at it from that angle if you want. What does he mean, hustling? Paying way, way more than you needed to, Michael, is not hustling. That's being hustled, mate. Even I understand that, and I am no Arthur Daly. You don't. Oh yeah, Cool. See that over there? It's worth 10 quid. We paid 50 quid for it. Why on earth did you pay 50 quid for it? We were hustling. We were hustling. Really? What about the other fella that got 50 quid for £10 worth of gear? Yeah, he was hustled. He's our victim. He's our stooge. We saw him come. You paid 50 quid for £10 worth of gear? Yep. Call me Arthur Daly. Okay. And that is, as far as I can tell, Michael Gove's actual explicit defence. Unless I've misunderstood, in which case call me and defend. VJ's in Edgware. VJ, what would you like to say?
Thanks for having me on, James.
You're welcome. You're not going to hustle me, are you, VJ? You're not going to hustle me.
Not at all.
No,
not at all. Wonderful show. Always listening to your show. It's the first time I've called in, actually.
You're very welcome.
But thank you for having me on. I'm a dentist based in Edgware, and we get a lot of PPE equipment coming in now in droves, basically, free of charge from the Department of Health.
Really?
In droves, and I think a lot of it just gets wasted. I think a lot of it is probably not fit for purpose as well.
And were you getting it when you needed it more? I mean, I know in a dentist...
When we needed it, we got it.
Right.
But initially, it was very hard to get hold of because we didn't get it in time.
Yeah.
When a lot of my colleagues, especially in the medical field, did not have any sort of PPE equipment. I have a lot of my patients who are nurses who literally had to put scarves around their faces to protect themselves.
Yeah.
It's been absolutely shambolic, to be honest with you. And now we have boxes and boxes of PPE equipment, and a lot of it, we open up the gloves, half of them are not actually fitting right. They're stuck together. And I just think that this whole thing is being just one big scam by people who have literally got contracts.
It's incredible. So they'll buy anything.
And, millions have been just,
£8.7 billion. Now, as we've established, and it's important to keep reminding each other, some of that will be justified, some of that will be inevitable, some of that will be avoidable. But the more we talk about it, thinking of you and the fella in the supermarket, they bought anything. I could have rung up and said, I got a lot. If you knew the right people, if you had the right contacts, if you went to the right school. I think I did go to the right school. I could have made it. I've got a lorry load. I've got a lorry load coming in from Istanbul. VJ, lorry load coming in from Istanbul.
James, they won't tell you this, but I have a feeling there's probably warehouses stacked full of PPE equipment because there was just no use for it, because there is no use for it now, and it was just completely ordered just to make people rich.
As you speak...
honestly.
No, listen, as you speak, one of my regular Twitter correspondents who works in trucking, he's a truck owner driver, as you speak... Jim tweets and he writes, the company I work for has over 50 containers with over 20 million quid's worth in storage fees for PPE that will no longer be used. So they're still paying to store it, despite the fact they know that they're not going to use it. And that, oh my God, do you want to be Dr. Watson or Sherlock Holmes?
It's absolutely crazy.
No, who do you want to be? Watson or Holmes? Because we've just solved the crime. We've solved it. That's why they're sending it to you, to save on storage fees.
But I solved that crime months ago.
Oh, all right, Sherlock.
Because no, I'm just saying, because I saw this coming a long time ago.
Yes.
Because, it was so obvious.
But that's the mystery. Why are they sending you dodgy gear? Answer, because otherwise they'd have to continue to pay to store it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if they set fire to it, or if they got caught chucking it all away, that would be a worse story than a mild-mannered dentist in Edgware just having to throw it in his bin
Well, this is the problem. We can just order as much as we want, and yes, you've got a lot of dental practices are stocking this PPE equipment up, but it beggars belief how they can just readily give you this in literally truckloads.
Well, it doesn't anymore. I mean, it beggars belief as a figure of speech, but as an actual incomprehensible act, it suddenly makes perfect sense, albeit that you solved it weeks ago. You took the wind out of my sails a bit there, VJ. I was getting all excited about a penny drop moment live on the radio, but for me, that's why they're sending out-of-date stuff to the supermarket up in the northeast. Darwin in Lancashire. That's why. That's why you're getting sent out-of-date hand gel. I'm sorry, but the wind is back in my sails. We've only gone and solved it. I've been sent a submission from one of the companies that got these contracts. It appears to be real. I'm just looking into what due diligence was done and how much care was taken. This is what was sent in by one of the companies that came away with a 260 million PPE contract, and this is what they wrote on the form. It says, "Stick a pony in me pocket, I'll fetch the suitcase from the van, because if you want the best ones, but you don't ask questions, then brother, I'm your man." And they apparently went to school with Jacob Rees-Mogg. That's how they ended up getting that contract. So well done there. I mean, it's entrepreneurial flair. Bella Goncharovitz is a fashion designer, a rather brilliant fashion designer that we spoke to a couple of times during the lockdown, and she had to put her company on hold and decided to turn her skills to making PPE voluntarily. I'm just going to say that again, because what we're discussing here is a sort of murder of crows who saw this coronavirus and immediately thought, how can we make a few quid? How can we make a few quid? And Bella did the opposite. Bella saw this crisis and thought to herself, how can I help? How can I help? And she helped by deploying her skills and knowledge and experience and contracts to make PPE. And she just tweeted me to say anyone who was making it voluntarily or crowdfunded, which she was doing, we gave her some publicity, tried to help out a bit with profile and what have you, was asked by the government to obtain a costly certificate to ensure it was fit for purpose. I'm flabbergasted that this may not have been the case for the so-called VIP lane for paid providers. But even if it was the case, it clearly wasn't done. So either they didn't have to prove that it was going to be fit for purpose, or there were no penalties subsequently when it was fit for purpose. Because the defence being offered up by PestFix and IANDA is that they delivered according to their contracts. This despite the fact that what they delivered was not fit for purpose. One lot sent masks that were too tight, and the other sent masks that were not tight enough. I mean, you know, again, that thing, it's going to be the recurring theme, I think, in 2022 on the programme. And it may sound a little jingoistic, which is not something I'm often accused of, but I didn't think, perhaps naively, stuff like this didn't happen in Britain. Stuff like this shouldn't happen in Britain. Stuff like this wouldn't happen in the UK. And yet here we are. And she sent a copy. If you want to have a look on Twitter, I'll retweet it. The reply she received from the Department of Health and Social Care when she tried to inquire about that procurement and private certification process. So if somebody offering to do it for no profit, somebody offering to do it for free, is being asked to jump through so many hoops that it almost becomes prohibitive, while the people making hundreds of millions of pounds doing it end up delivering stuff that wasn't fit for purpose. This is really important, you know. This is really important. It's also another example of my big fear at the moment, that we're going to drown in a sea of bad behaviour, possible criminality, corruption. There's just going to be so much of it, like there was with Donald Trump, that we end up not knowing which way to turn, not knowing what to talk about next. But the companies that got hundreds of millions of pounds claiming that they fulfilled their contractual obligations even though they delivered dodgy stuff, and here we have one example of somebody trying to do it for free, almost being prevented from doing it by the red tape that she was expected to follow. And I think the Good Law Project looked into some of this, didn't they, onto whether or not these contracts had been awarded in a fit and proper fashion. It stinks. It absolutely stinks. And it's your money now. 8.7 billion quid of it. So I don't think it's going to be defensible on the grounds that it really upsets people like me anymore. That was kind of what was used for a while by the Boris Johnson fan club. Oh, I love it. I love it. I know I'm being lied to, but it really upsets James O'Brien and Gary Lineker. Well, okay, you happy now? That's all your money that they've given to their mates in return for dodgy gear? 10:55 is the time. Helen is in Stoke-on-Trent. Helen, what would you like to say?
I find the whole situation, if I'm honest, absolutely heartbreaking.
I bet you do.
Boris is somebody I voted for in the hopes of we would come out of the slump from Labour's previous government and the previous Prime Ministers. And I just find it heartbreaking to have an actual judge say, and I think a quote was, in breach of the obligation of equal treatment. So we've got a Prime Minister who has behaved in a way during lockdown that obviously we haven't had the full report released yet, but we believe to be illegal. We've now got a Prime Minister who led a government that was in breach of the obligation of equal treatment, so criminality. And as a care worker, I just find it heartbreaking. Like, at what point do we look at this government and say, you are acting repeatedly in a legal way? This cannot stand anymore. Like, we are a country that has stood with pride in our democracy and our justice system, and I just find it tragic that we've been led to this situation.
I mean, I completely know I share your feelings, and it's funny sometimes. I don't know whether you find this ringing into me, whether it helps you get your thoughts in order. But I was talking to an Irish radio station yesterday, and oddly, it gave me a little bit more perspective, trying to explain it to people on the outside. And I got really upset, Helen. As you say, heartbreaking. It's not anger. Well, obviously I'm angry as well, but it is.
I agree.
There's a sense of wonder, isn't there? A sense of tragic wonder at what's happening to the country at the moment.
I mean, in a number of ways, my family, obviously, as every other family, but my family were particularly affected during lockdown. I birthed alone to my daughter. My family didn't meet my daughter until she was approaching 18 months old. She'd lived her whole life during lockdown. I'm a care worker. I went back to work off maternity leave early because I thought my country needs me. How can I help? I can help by being on the front lines, caring for the elderly, caring for the vulnerable, being there, being a part of this cycle. And I just thought, let's support the government, let's get on board.
Yes.
And to find, we struggled with PPE. So as a company, what we did is we went and bought our own from local shops. Anything that we could do to support the government, to support our local area, to support this horrendous thing that was ongoing, only to then hear that our own government are having parties, are breaching the rule of law by having VIP lanes to avoid COVID contracts, which the High Court has ruled as unlawful. Well, surely that is the answer to the question. That we at least know of two acts.
I mean, that's the hustle defence as well, though. I mean, if they'd done good work, if the hustle,
treating us like we're idiots.
Yeah, they are treating us like we're idiots.
They're treating us as if we're not from Eton, therefore the rest of us must be uneducated, unintelligent.
I don't know. I mean, listen, I don't know if we're overanalyzing the con, as it were. It's more the deference than the idiocy. They just think that we've always got away with it. I wonder. This is what psychologically fascinates me. Whether previously relatively well-behaved people, whether they were only well-behaved because they were frightened of the consequences, or whether they were well-behaved because they understood the importance of decency and standards. They live with Boris, they work with Boris, and 6 months later they're throwing parties on the night before Prince Philip's funeral. It is like he infects them, and it may have carried over into policy as well.
Or are they, again, during this scandal that was spoken of on the radio during the earlier part of the week, where are they scared for what happens to their children's education? Are they scared for their jobs? Are they scared for... In which case, we've got a whole nother factor going on in this government, and you just think, at what point do we draw the line? And I know it's probably not comparable, but thinking back hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we'd executed monarchs as a country because we'd had enough of the way we were ruled, and we wanted a democracy.
Only the one, Helen, I think. But yeah, I mean, how bad does it have to get? And of course, he's doing his best. I'll stop slagging him off. 8.7 billion quid, 153,000 dead. Lying about Keir Starmer, lying about economic recovery. Turns out they haven't even hired Linton Crosby, which was being reported yesterday. I think I heard it on LBC. Linton Crosby's back in the fold. He's not. Someone rang him up and asked him. So Boris Johnson rings me occasionally. I might sort of always take calls from right-wing politicians who've paid me a lot of money in the past. But no, I'm not on the payroll. I'm not hired. I live in Australia now. Incredible, isn't it? Oh, really? Apparently we've got Michael Gove on the line to explain exactly what the government's approach to PPE procurement was.
Stick a bunny in me pocket. I'll fetch the suitcase from the van. If you want the lessons, but you don't ask questions, then brother, I'm your man. Cause where it all comes from is a mystery. It's like the changing of the seasons and the tides of the sea. But here's the one was driving me berserk. Why do only fools and horses work? La 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 la, la 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 la, la la la.
Thank you, Michael. And Pat, you could tell the rest of the Cabinet that you can come on this programme and not get interrupted. Apparently, ironically enough, coincidentally enough, it's David Jason's birthday today as well. So happy birthday to David Jason, the actor who famously, of course, played Del Boy, who Michael Gove has been channeling all morning in various interview slots. And actually, glancing at my switchboard, the appetite to continue with this conversation is pretty high. So I'll tell you what the other element I want to discuss pre-PMQs is. What is levelling up? What is it? Does anyone know? 03456060973. And if you're in a part of the country that is considered to be unprosperous or poor, Is it actually quite patronising or not? Labour describing it, I think, correctly as sort of yet another empty slogan. We're levelling up. They keep saying we're levelling up. What does it mean? Do you know what it means? And if you don't know what it means, why did you vote for it? 0345 60 60973 is the number you need. But looking at this question, and I had another thought. I know what you're thinking. Be careful. That's dangerous. But I did have another thought, at least one. This is the lot that want to get rid of regulations, isn't it? And checks. You remember when they talk about the bonfire of the red tape? That phrase for me assumes a sinister subtext in the aftermath of Grenfell. The idea that we have too much regulation in place in this country. Our standards are too high. If you ever manage to dig down into the dark heart of these dodgy think tanks and these vampires who hate every penny that they pay in tax that might make its way into the pocket of somebody else to buy food for their children or to educate them or to give them hospital treatment, the people who fund these think tanks, the people who essentially sponsor politicians like Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg, if you ever manage to dig down into their dark hearts, what you find is a hatred of anything that is an obstacle to profit. These are the people. You think free market sounds like an innocuous term, and all of these think tanks talk about the free market. You think it's an innocuous term? No. Imagine a market that treats standards in the same way that Boris Johnson does. Boris Johnson, in a sense, is the free market made flesh. It means you can do whatever the hell you want if there's a profit in it. You know, fire escapes on flats? Don't be stupid. We don't need fire escapes. I'm not going to be living there. I'm just selling them. We must resist at all corners fire safety precautions on properties because I own it. I don't live in it. Why do I want fire safety precautions? I'm going to have lots of safety in my own house. I'll pay for that. But if they want fire escapes in the flats that I'm selling them, they can pay for them themselves. They can build them themselves. You want to have your food checked before you sell it? Cheap food for peasants? Don't be ridiculous. I'm not going to eat this stuff, but I shouldn't have to actually go through standards, food standards. You're joking, aren't you? We need a free market. We don't want standards. We don't want regulations on the stuff that we sell to other people. I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself. I'm sufficiently wealthy and educated to know what's healthy and what's unhealthy. Screw the poor. I should be able to pour corn syrup down their necks until they explode like Monsieur Creosote in that Monty Python film, because there's profit in it. And I think I'll secretly fund a think tank so that they can pop up on the telly claiming that we shouldn't have taxes on sugary foods or that there shouldn't be anything. Government shouldn't interfere in our lives. This is what they hate. They hate standards. They hate regulations. They hate anything that costs them a few quid that is designed to protect other people. When you look at a story like this, think back to the darkest days of the pandemic. Think back to the darkest days of the lockdowns. And tell me how you'd have felt then if you'd known that they were spaffing your money up the wall on stuff that could never be used, but that the people getting the money were mates and cronies and pub landlords and donors. How would you have felt smack in the middle of that saga, that sorriest of sagas, if you'd learnt this? And how were they getting away with it? This is why Jolie and Morm get so active in the field. They're getting away with it because they actually suspended the normal rules and regulations. And what is the credo? What is the go-to claim of the so-called Brexiteer or the vote leave cabal that remains at the heart of our government? We've got to get rid of the red tape. They never tell you what it means. We have too much red tape. The country in which Grenfell Tower burned has too much red tape and regulation. The country in which Conservative mates can walk away with hundreds of millions of pounds for PP that is unfit for purpose, and we have too much regulation in this country? Our standards are too high? You think? Just think of the fire escape and the property developer and the effort that the property developer puts into influencing public discourse by sponsoring think tanks who turn up on the BBC and ITV and, sadly, LBC. You can barely turn your telly on these days without one of these ghouls sitting there railing against government spending. Won't be railing against this government spending because this money has made its way into the pockets of the people who fund the think tanks. And people who work for these think tanks now work in Downing Street. Just join the dots. It's not difficult. And just think of the fire escape. It's an entirely theoretical example, obviously, but it's a very helpful one. Why do I have to spend money on fire escapes? I'm not going to be living in this place. I'm just going to be renting it out. And that is the mindset of your free marketeer. Your toxic free marketeer. And that, I think, is the mindset of the person that wants to remove regulations. And what this PPE scandal is giving us is a very helpful glimpse of what that will look like for you and me, and also what that will look like. I'm not going to be wearing the PPE. Why should I care whether it's fit for purpose or not? I'm just selling it. What it will look like for the people most interested in ripping up the regulations. And remember, if this lot can try and indeed originally get away with a plan to rip up the standards that parliamentarians have to abide by, to actually abolish effectively the parliamentary standards rule book, which they tried to do after Owen Paterson got caught. If they can do that in the House of Commons, this is what I mean by debasing our democracy, debasing our seat of government, debasing our parliament. If they, look, think of it like this. If they can lie to the Queen and pass a motion designed to rip up the rule book of parliamentary standards, do you really think that there's any depth that they won't plumb? Of course there isn't. And they talk in such flowery terms about ripping up the rule, red tape, bonfire of the red. They're just getting rid of all the stuff that's designed to protect the little people because they think that the big people don't need to pay for the protection of the little people because they're perfectly capable of protecting themselves. Sodom. Why should I care whether this PPE is too tight or too loose? Why should I care whether it fits? Why should I care if it's out of date, this hand gel? I'm not using it. I'm sending it to Lancashire. I'm sending it to a dentist in Edgware. I don't care. I don't care. Stop telling me that it doesn't work. I don't care. All I care about, are they paying for it? Yeah, they're paying for it because Michael Gove's hustled us. Michael Gove has hustled us. He's hustled us into flogging out of date, useless PPE. And he's doing a lap of honour around Whitehall claiming that he's, I don't know, the Elon Musk of the UK government. You couldn't make it up, could you? You could not make it up. And I'm not. Fergal's in Putney. Sorry, mate. I don't know where that came from. I hope you're still awake.
Yeah, well, these think tanks, you know, I think I've talked to you before about them, 55 Tufton Street and all these places. And, the dark people who influence this country, you know, so I could talk to you hours about this.
But that's not what you rang in for. I've got that covered.
No. You got that covered. Yeah, listen, this whole scandal that's going on here, like, you know, you're talking about the billions and billions that have been spent overseas. At the time when this all kicked off, my partner is working in a hospital and ventilation unit, and she had to use an apron to cover her mouth. And I went absolutely ballistic at the time. Actually called in LBC. LBC did a great job of publicising what was happening in the hospitals. And then a group of us, we set up Helpful Engineers. We started manufacturing PPE. We started with visors. First week, we're making about 10 a day. We got it up to about.
I remember you talking about this. Not to me, I don't think.
I've spoken to your colleagues. And actually, I actually know Bell as well because we started looking into manufacturing gowns.
Oh gosh.
So we ended up with about 300 volunteers supplying major London hospitals, COVID centres, doctors, surgeries. We started making masks as well. And what happened was we got stopped on the 6th of May by the Department of
DHSC.
Energy. Yeah. And they came up with a new rule. Anybody supplying PPE, even for free, you're personally liable to get sued if there's any problem. And we had to pretty much shut down overnight.
And yet this company here, Ianda, 253 million quid, including unusable face masks claim that they delivered according to their contract. So it does seem that you were being held to a higher standard doing it for free than some of the companies that were doing it for oodles and oodles of taxpayers' cash.
Yeah, but the thing is, we between the 300 plus volunteers, we had some pretty clued-in people who are directors of companies and this and that. We actually looked into the standards, and it was like this EN 166 and the WHO standards, which didn't really actually make sense when you started going through it. And in order to get certified, you have to pay to get certified for these various different things, which takes several months. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Everybody's running around like crazy trying to get PPE. We're using an international design that's been accepted by hospitals around the world, right? We're giving the equipment for free. We're not charging a single penny for this. We actually got our cost per unit.
They think you're a mug, you know that, don't they? They laugh at you in Downing Street and Tufton Street and those places. They're doing it for free. There's an Irish fella on LBC. He does it for free. He doesn't look at we just bought a new house and he tried to do it for free. They laugh at you. You know that, don't you?
Well, look, it is absolutely bonkers. And it rages me hearing the amount of money that's been squandered on PPE and these contracts.
But how could it have been squandered if they had to abide by the same rules that you were told you had to abide by? That's the bit I'm struggling with today.
Well, you hear about Michael Gove having to hustle?
He was hustling, mate. Yeah, absolutely hustling. Yeah,
he's hustling. I'm driving around, going to car parks in hospitals, and I'm having doctors coming down to the back of the car like a drug dealer, opening the back of the car and saying what you need, and goes, "Can you give us 200 visors? Can we take some of these? Can we take some of that?" And it's like, yeah, off you go.
And you were doing it not for no profit,
we're doing for no profit. They tied us up in red tape and realised the certification process you had to go through. We looked into it. There's like various independent people who do this. It didn't quite fit the match that we were doing. It never got done. One group did manage to do it. It took them about 2 months. And by then, they're buying dodgy equipment from overseas.
I mean, that is the miss. I mean, it's just appalling. Thank you for what you did. And like Bella, they might think you're stupid. I think you're the bee's knees. I really do. But I think that's it, isn't it? It's the country we're building. And once again, the people that are most responsible for this are the people doffing their caps and tugging their forelocks while getting robbed blind by people that they think are their social betters. Here's a little game you can play during the break. If Michael Gove is Del Boy and Jacob Rees-Mogg is Rodney, who would be Trigger? If we were to turn the cabinet of hustlers into characters from Only Fools and Horses, which one would be Trigger? And you can tweet me that, or text me that. Either is fine. I've got a feeling there's going to be one contender who's head and shoulders above the rest, but we shall see. So Michael Gove is Del Boy and Jacob Rees-Mogg is Rodney. Which one of these clowns is going to be Trigger? Dominic Raab is Trigger. He's not even close to being in first place, though. And a few of you have correctly pointed out, including the producer, that we're essentially talking about quite likeable people or quite likeable characters. So it's a little unfair, perhaps, upon John Sullivan's creations to compare them to the current cabinet. But yes, our current Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport is far, far ahead. I've already cast Jacob Rees-Mogg as Rodney. And that's just physical appearance. Obviously, Rodney's lovely and kind and all the things that Jacob Rees-Mogg doesn't seem to be. But no, it's so trussed. It's so childish. I love it. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we've got rather carried away, to be honest, or we've been carried away by commentary on and insights into this £8.7 billion of money that has been written off. Now, some of it would have been irredeemable. Some of this money would have had to be written off. For example, the transport costs that Lewis and Ealing explained right at the top of the show. You've got no control over transport costs. If it costs you £1 to get something from A to B in January and it costs you £2 to get it from A to B in February, then it is going to cost you more in February than it did in January. You can tell I went to the London School of Economics, can't you? It's these kind of explanations that prove it. So that is a given. All right, there is a very strong argument, and you're unlikely to see it in much of the right-wing media. There's a very, very strong argument that some of the pandemic forecasting and planning that was done whether it was called Operation Cygnus or whether it was a unit that was closed down. I don't know. I haven't dug deep enough into it for you yet, but I will. There's quite a strong argument that we should and could have been considerably better prepared, and deliberate decisions were taken not to be. Why? Well, I've explained to you the cult of toxic free markets. Why on earth are we spending things on possible problems coming up in the future when we could be keeping the money for ourselves? So there is, that as well. But this 8.7 billion quid is just breathtaking. The other thing that we were going to talk about this hour, and at the moment I've only got one phone line free, and I'm asking the question with a 50-50, no, 52-48 taking the mickey, but 48% hoping you'll have a proper answer to it. What is levelling up? Because once he's finished hustling for the day, Michael Gove will be announcing today details of the levelling up agenda. Do you know what it is? Can you explain it to? What is levelling up? 0345 6060 973. 2 phone lines free now. So you can grab one of them to tell the rest of us what levelling up is. In positive or negative terms, of course. Angus is in home ground in Coniston. Angus, what would you like to say?
Morning, Jane.
Hello.
I was working as a locum in a hospital in the far northwest of England when it all kicked off.
Right.
In fact, I've worked all the way through.
Sure.
And when it all started, the Department of Health was putting out guidelines every day about the different types of PPE required. Anyway, there was a piece of A4 paper which went up in the department where I was working every day. And it changed every day. So it wasn't,
really?
Yeah, it wasn't PPE by clinical assessment. It was PPE by lack of supply. So
and again, it falls to me slightly sometimes to be the devil's advocate, but in a good way, because there will also have been things like face masks, for example. The guidance changed as we learnt more about the virus. So some of the changes will have a decent rationale, but what you're suggesting is that a lot of them were actually just a way of dressing up the shortages.
No, they were retrograde. So we started off with surgical masks.
Yeah.
And then we went up to FFP2 masks. And when stores ran out of those, the next day you were down to surgical masks again. And when they got more of the higher grade ones, you were told to wear those. So it just changed every day. It went up and down, up and down.
So just by dint of what was available. So if they couldn't give you the stuff, if they couldn't, sorry, I'm being a bit slow, aren't I? I do apologise. I'm doing my impression of Trigger. So this is what you need, but actually we're saying this is all we've got.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It wasn't PPE by clinical assessment. It was PPE by lack of supply.
And when you read that £8.7 billion worth has been written off?
Well, just to give you an example of ingenuity, I suppose, or stupidity in some people's eyes, I do a bit of spare work on farms around the area, and I got some carving gloves. I take it you've watched the Yorkshire Vet and all that.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so they're the big sort of gauntlets which go from your fingertips up to your armpit when you put your hand up a cow's bottom.
Thank you, Angus, for that, yeah.
And I wore those because we didn't have anything to cover our arms when we went into clinical areas. And I had a manager approach me and told me to take them off. So I said, why should I take them off?
Yeah.
She said, because not everybody's got access to them. You're lowering morale.
Oh, Lord above. Just to clarify, they were new. They hadn't recently been up any cow's bottoms.
No, they hadn't been used. No, they were straight out of the box.
Because you wouldn't want to be operated on by a bloke who's wearing gloves that have just been up a cow's jacksie.
So, there was
I see the point that the manager was making, oddly, in that everyone else in the operating theatre would be going, why can't I have some cow bum gloves?
Yeah, well, there was that instance of the A&E consultant in London.
Yeah.
He went out on the internet and bought himself a full set of PPE, walked in the department. He was told to take it off or go home. I mean, I actually know the guy.
And that was so you can't take your own measures to protect yourself because it will highlight how poorly the hospital is doing, or poorly the government has done in supplying the hospital with the PPE that's needed.
Yeah, I took my own FFP3 masks in.
Did you?
I managed to get some.
Yeah.
From a guy who, of all things, is a sandblaster, and they wear FFP3 masks.
Wow.
And I was wearing them. I got told to take those off. But the most frightening thing that happened to me, I was a locum.
Yeah, you said.
And we used to have, we were told we all had to have a mask fitting, which takes about 15 minutes to make sure, because all masks fit different faces.
Yeah.
So you can't get particles in. And it was the Friday before Easter weekend. So I said, please can I have a mask fitting? And the answer to me was, no, you're a locum.
Gosh.
I mean,
so you breathe differently from the staff doctors?
Oh yeah.
Completely different different respiratory system from.
Yeah, I was told directly to my face, no, I couldn't have one because I'm a locum. I mean, I know we are treated, with expedience, but I mean that's was
insane.
Harsh.
But I mean, it's medically ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's not just personally insulting. I get the sense that you're not shy of kicking up a fuss.
No.
Well, that's what you need to be, unfortunately, isn't it? The squeaky wheels get the oil.
That's what we are in Cumbria, James.
Whether you've got your arms up a cow's backside or not, Angus.
Yeah.
Thank you, mate. I'm sorry it's such grim tidings or such grim fare that we are sharing, but it's so important, isn't it? It's all there. It's all there. 03456060973 is the number you need to join in with this conversation. I don't know how we got it right today. I went off on a bit of a mad one at 10 o'clock, started doing some of my very, very poor attempts at comedy. But we've obviously hit the right buttons, and what could have been quite a dry story has turned out to be anything but, including veterinary anecdotes. But that's it, Angus telling stories there about what was going on in the middle of it. And this is the tragedy of Boris Johnson's premiership, is that it's all about getting away with stuff. It's not even about learning from stuff. So we don't even have the silver lining of thinking, well, maybe you do, and you're welcome to ring me and tell me, that one of the silver linings of having made so many mistakes is that we'll be much better prepared next time. At which point I have to remind you, Boris Johnson is waltzing around the place claiming that he's played a blinder. And people are still standing up in public saying that he got all the major decisions right. And that is North Korea now. That is nuts. And the tragedy of it isn't the political expediency or the corruption of objective truth or the absolute debasement of Parliament and even the monarch and all of our traditions, the rule of law, international reputation. The real tragedy, of course, of that attitude is we won't learn from what was done wrong. If you're claiming you got it all right, how can you possibly learn from what you got wrong? Sorry. Pointing that out. I was toying with the idea of turning it into a feature, maybe getting a theme tune, but it's too serious to do that. So here's a headline from the Times today. Johnson and Patel, and the next bit's in quotes, lied about dropping crime rate, end quotes. Boris Johnson and Priti Patel. Priti Patel, you remember, is the Home Secretary who tried to garner applause for a reduction in shoplifting in a period of British history when almost all of the shops were shut. This game we were playing, obviously Nadine Dorries won by several lengths, but the idea of guessing which one of them will be Trigger, not the sort of nice bits of Trigger, but the irredeemable stupidity of Trigger, the Only Fools and Horses character. There were actually a lot of contenders. People reminded me of Gavin Williamson, of course, but Priti Patel boasting about the decline in shoplifting at a time when most of the shops were shut was just a moment of comedic genius. But her and Johnson have both been claiming that crime has gone down. I think she said by 14%. No, Johnson said in his response to the Sue Gray report into Downing Street parties. I'll just read that again. In his response to the Sue Gray report into Downing Street parties in the Commons on Monday, the Prime Minister claimed that the government had cut crime by 14% since he entered number 10. Patel had claimed in a Home Office press release last week that the government, quotes, continues to cut crime, end quotes. Unfortunately, they're both contradicted by figures from the Office for National Statistics. Oh, yeah, damn those lefties at the Office for National Statistics. The people what do the actual counting. This claim of a 14% fall in overall crime from July 2019 when Johnson became Prime Minister actually excluded fraud offences. That £4.7 billion worth of which happened as a direct consequence of Rishi Sunak's financial packages. So they just cut out crimes. that they didn't want to count and claim that there'd been an actual reduction. So fraud increased by 47% between September 2020 and September 2021. I know what you're thinking. Yeah, but shoplifting went down. And once the fraud offences are added, then the overall crime rose by 14% in the 12 months that Boris Johnson was claiming a 14% reduction in. So Johnson and I don't know if the quotes are needed. Anyway, they've been reported to the Office for National Statistics, get reported to everybody. They'll be reported to the head teacher next. And the other story that involves untruths, or that appears at least to involve untruths, I'll share with you a little later in the programme. That's what I was going to do as a feature. Oh, yeah, no, it was Linton Crosby, wasn't it? Did you see what I did there? I forgot what it was, so I said I'll share it with you later in the programme to make it sound like that was the plan all along. Did you fall for that? Did you think, oh, he's doing one of those hooks and teasers? I bet he forgets. There's a claiming, or certainly giving the impression, that Linton Crosby, who kind of very much of the it doesn't matter whether it's true or not, all that matters is whether or not people believe it school of political spin doctoring, in my opinion. I'm sure others would disagree. But Johnson giving the impression to backbenchers at the 22, certainly backbenchers coming out of that meeting under the impression that Johnson is hiring Linton Crosby again, that he's back on the team. But no, Peter Oborne, brilliant journalist, old school, rang him, asked him. That's how you do it, kids. Rang him and asked him. Peter Oborne also keeping a chronicle of all Boris Johnson's lies in the way that the Washington Post did for Donald Trump's for a while. And Crosby said, no, I always take calls from right-wing leaders, world leaders, if they ring me. But I'm not. I live in Australia and I have done for months. It's just incredible. 11:38 is the time, and David is in Dubai. David, what made you pick up the phone?
Hey, James. Listen, just on behalf of all of us expats around the world, thank you for fighting the good fight and trying to make us not all look ridiculous.
Well, yeah. I don't know if I'm making much progress, but it's a living, David. It's a living. What can I say?
No, don't give up. You make us all feel sane.
Thank you.
The reason I called was I wanted to make a couple of points. First point was leading into and very much cementing the narrative, that's on today, which is if you didn't have government contacts, you're not going to get anywhere.
Feels that way.
And the other one was, well, because I experienced it, and I'll tell you the story. But the other one was, well, as much as I dislike this government, and I think they are a bunch of clowns.
Yeah.
What else could we do? Because the civil service is designed to be very bureaucratic.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you fit in this box? Tick this box. And when you're in an emergency situation, needing to scramble for the PPE that everybody did around the world, you kind of have to break that and not allow the typical civil servant to sort of slow down the process. I'm not saying it was right, but I'm sort of just trying to...
No, I understand. There is a defence. I mean, to be fair to Michael Gove, there is a defence that says, no, we really had to cut some corners in order to get it as quickly as possible. But that doesn't excuse getting rubbish.
No, absolutely not. And so here's the example that I've got for that is I was doing some fundraising, as in, trying to structure some capital raising for a company that provides garments to the MOD. Let's say that.
Okay. Garments to the MOD. Carry on. It's like something out of Joseph Heller. This is pure Catch-22 territory. Lovely. Go on.
I'm not allowed to name them.
No, fair enough.
So they had an idea of repurposing the facility to put in a Type 2R mask facility.
Oh yeah.
We went through full DD. We got the equipment. We got the polypropylene that's required to actually manufacture this stuff. We put a proper, significant, experienced team together. We presented it to DHSC, and we heard crickets. At the same time, I've got a friend of mine that is relatively well connected within the Conservative circles.
Right.
And I saw that, he got fast-tracked. He was able to sell the same masks that we were prepared to sell, at a margin of probably about 20%, right, to recoup our capital.
Sure.
It was 2,000% that they got the contract for. So it wasn't a case of it was dodgy stuff. It was, we made a case of, well, post-Brexit Britain, which, I hate saying those words, we want to put in some UK investment, create some jobs, provide a service and a product that's needed for the foreseeable, given that we're in a pandemic.
Yeah.
And we're going to do it at a reasonable cost. And we opened up our books in terms of this is the cost price, this is what our margin is.
Whoa.
We're even prepared to do it at a cost plus 10 basis. We'd have to keep it very reasonable. And this other chap, who I decided not to go down that route because I thought stupidly and rather naively, that you don't need to have government contacts. We're doing a perfectly good.
The offer will speak for itself. The offer plus our track record will speak for itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And given the fact that they're an MOD contractor, although it's for the garments side of things, we were just absolutely ignored. We got a thank you, we'll get back to you, never heard. And, my mate, quid's in.
Knows the right people, wears the right tie, knows the handshakes.
Absolutely. And a bit like you, Jez, I come from that similar background, but I refuse to, I very much believe in it. You're born 3-0 up. Do something about it.
Absolutely.
Do something good with it.
Yeah.
Not
beautifully
but
there you are, and this is obviously not an uncommon experience. It is, and that's what I think is the most frightening element of today's conversations. Is that it's you can just imagine them sitting there going, "Yep," you got Gove claiming they were hustling. They're paying 2,000% more than they needed to, or whatever it is, a ludicrous markup. And now we just got to suck it up. Unlucky, carry on, as you were, back to normal now. Oh, by the way, we're going to get rid of more regulations. It's going to make it easier for profiteers to ride roughshod over whatever standards we have left after Brexit.
Yeah. James, can I just say, can you please keep on doing what you're doing?
I'm beginning to think Brexit was quite a good idea, and I'm thinking of joining the Conservative Party as long as they promise to leave Boris Johnson in charge.
Listen, if you do, I'll do. That's what I'll say.
I'm going nowhere, David. However hard the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport may have tried to write a different story. Thank you, mate. I do appreciate the kind words, and in fact, while I am appreciating the kind words, this just came in from Karen in Kenton, and it tickled me pink, Karen. James, you're such a tonic. I've been so unwell recently due to stress caused by the way these clowns are running our affairs, but I've laughed loads this morning. Thank you. Well, it's a team effort, Karen, isn't it? I think 11:43 is the time. Zoe is in Ulverston in Cumbria. We're going big on Cumbria today. Zoe, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello.
Doesn't involve cows' bottoms, does it? The last caller from Cumbria has put me right off my 11s.
No cows here at the moment.
Okay.
You'll be quite pleased to know I run a micro gin distillery with my husband.
Lovely stuff.
Yes, it is rather. The thing is, the whole thing is just, I hate to use these words like disgust and livid and angry, because there is a case that, why are we surprised by any of this? I don't really see why we would be surprised. And if anybody who thought that Boris Johnson at some point was a good man, maybe they should kind of read history a little bit more. Yeah. But the thing is with us, we as I said, we're a micro gin distillery, and it's my husband and I, particularly at that time. That hadn't been going very long. Lockdown came along, everything stopped, lost all our customers, lost everything in that respect, and so thought, okay, we're going to...
It surprised me slightly. I'd have thought that there'd be quite a run on gin during the lockdown.
No, it's that initial first lockdown stage. So the initial first lockdown was that all the shops were closed, all the wholesale was closed, all the bars, the hotels. So our income went from 1 point to nothing overnight.
Gosh.
It was then later on that the online started up and things, and our customers have been wonderful and very, very supportive, and we survived, which we're really, really pleased about. And we're doing very well now.
Brilliant.
But the thing is that the day after the lockdown, we were asked by our local hospice if we could make sanitizer.
Oh, were you?
So we got in touch with HMRC and got to completely give them their due, because it's a totally different licence, but they were saying if you've got alcohol, use it, we'll sort the licences out, get it out there.
Yeah, brilliant.
And of course what we felt was that morally there was no way that we could charge people for this, because it's a national emergency.
Honestly didn't cross your minds?
It never ever crossed our minds. We were criticised for it later on, but
by whom?
it was certain groups, business groups that we came across, who said that
You did what?
We did what, and do you understand the GDP of Cumbria and what we need to do, etc.
Yeah,
But that was them. But that doesn't matter, because we were doing what we needed to do. So we used up the first lot of alcohol that we had, and then had no finances coming in. So I put a Just Giving page up online, and within, I would say, about 3 weeks, the wonderful people of Cumbria and beyond, and a couple of businesses, have given us £6,500 and said, if you please get on and make it. So we were able to then get bottles, which were like hen's teeth. We got scammed a couple of times with glycerin, etc., because there are a lot of scams going on.
Oh, gosh.
We also, alcohol, the price of alcohol went up 4 times, but we were able to get the stuff in. So it was Andrew and I, my husband and I, in the distillery, literally with buckets, mixing and filling and mixing and filling. And then we had the issue of delivery, because we had this secondary issue because my husband has a rare genetic disorder, which means that he produces lots of skin cancer. And so he made the decision to stop his continued treatment so that he wouldn't be vulnerable, so he could do the delivery of everything.
This is a sense of patriotic duty, is it?
Well, you're in it.
It's above and beyond, Zoe. It's above and beyond what most people did, but it's an astonishing story. Actually, it's inspirational.
Well, it's very kind that people have been very kind to us about it. But to be perfectly honest, there were no thoughts about what we could or couldn't do. It was just a case of, we have the means, we have the place. And when Andrew said, no, I'm going to just put that on hold and let's do it, thinking, of course, it would be a month or two and then that would be fine. And we thought that we would just be doing the local care homes and, the old people's homes and maybe the odd nursery or something. But then the phone calls started coming in as soon as people knew we were doing it. Ambulance service had nothing.
Really? So you were filling huge holes that you didn't even know existed?
We didn't even know they were there. The South Lakes Mental Health had nothing. Of course, the food banks
all pro bono.
And the homeless supports, etc. Samaritans. The MOD called us.
Are you serious?
Yeah. We were filling bottles in our micro distillery, and the MOD called us and said, "I hear that you're making it. Can you give us X amount?" We went, "No, we can't.
We haven't got enough. We've literally run out." Why? This so far is a good story, though. I mean, I'm welcoming it. I'm glad it's a good story.
Yes, and it is, and Andrew is fine.
Good,
and
thank God for that.
He is back on
You know how to tell a story, Zoe. I'll give you that for nothing. I'll tell you what, if your gin is as good as your stories, then count me in.
We have actually, just to feel much better, we are now finalists of Best Cumbria Drinks Producer this year, so keep your fingers crossed for March the 3rd.
Certainly will.
So it caused us massive mental health issues.
Yeah,
it caused us. We never got any downtime at all, and then thankfully people started buying gin as well.
Yeah.
But what we saw and what we heard and the stories were just unbelievable. I mean, I think one that there are two that always stick out in my head, and one of them was a woman, because people were really banging on about private carers and how awful they were, taking all the PPE. Well, we knew people, and this lady called, and she had lots of, usually women, working for her, going into usually elderly women's houses, and she could not get anything. And private company, she was happy to buy something, she just couldn't get anything at all.
For love or money.
And so her lovely ladies were going in to see their clients, but of course the district nurses couldn't go, so her carers were doing medical stuff instead of the district nurses. The families couldn't get to see their relatives, so the carers were going out shopping for these people as well. They were doing everything possible, and none of them ever wanted to go off sick, but they hadn't had any PPE for over a week, not a thing. And they were still coming in every day and still trying to do their best and wash their hands and look after themselves and keep themselves safe whilst looking after all of these people who are homebound.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is awful, what you describe, but your efforts to help have cheered everybody up, actually. I need to ask you what the name of the company is, because I think you might have drummed up some custom, accidentally, because I know that wasn't the purpose of your call, but a lot of people are saying this is precisely the sort of business I'd like to be supporting.
Well, that's very kind of you, and thank you. We're called Shed One Distillery.
There you go.
And we're based in Ulverston in Cumbria, and we are the only distillery in the South Lakes. And
stuff.
as I say, thankfully we are doing very well, and we have lovely customers and lovely people. But you've got to look after each other. And I said, Andrew he was driving all the way around Cumbria for months, going off and seeing people and getting things sorted, and many other people in this area and others were doing the same.
Shoulders to the wheel, and then when you hear all of these stories about people who responded to precisely the same impetus that you and Andrew responded to by thinking, how can I make millions and millions of pounds out of this? So you get an idea of just how different people can be, don't you?
It's very sad, and the
Of course it
problem
is.
is that it's the people in power do not reflect the population.
I hope you're right. I do, and I need to hear from people like you to keep. I'm incredibly late for the break. I'm getting all sorts of funny looks from Keith, so I will have to leave it there. But you do more than just make hand gel when you tell stories like that. So you make hope and positivity. In return, because I feel I should offer you something in return. If you ever branch out into vodka, I would be prepared to advise.
Well, that's quite easy. We just take the juniper out.
Is that it? Well, no. I mean, come on. It's not that simple. I want top notes of lavender and things like that on a.
You did that.
But you know where I am. If you ever decide to branch out, I shall be happy to share decades of experience with you.
The man is a wanker. He don't get much better. Man is a wanker. The man is a wanker. He don't get much better. The man is a wanker. The man is a wanker. He don't get much better.